Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. We are continuing our coverage of this year's Academy Awards, and today we welcome the Oscar-nominated sound team behind Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. This is our third episode about the film, which has a total of 9 Oscar nominations. A few weeks ago, we welcomed Guillermo along with nominated cinematographer Dan Laustsen, and another episode featured composer Alexander Desplat, who was nominated for Best Original Score. You can find links to those episodes in our show notes. Joining us today are some of Guillermo's longtime collaborators in the sound department: sound designer and supervising sound editor Nathan Robitaille, supervising sound editor Nelson Ferreira, re-recording mixer Brad Zoern, and production sound mixer Greg Chapman. Like all of Guillermo's films, this one is epic and features an extraordinary track. There is so much to talk about, so let's jump right in. So I just wanted to start by saying, you guys have been working with Guillermo now for many, many years across several different projects. And I mean, he's known to be a very visual director. But, I remember working with him back when I was running Skywalker Sound. We did Mimic and also Hellboy. And even back then, he was really, really specific about what he wanted in terms of the sound for his films. We talked with Guillermo and Dan Laustsen on the podcast a few weeks ago, and Guillermo even showed us he brought up his little notebook that he paints in acrylics, the visual elements that he wants to explore in the film. So I want to start, Nathan, for you and Nelson. Does he have a similar approach to the sound? Like, how prescriptive is he? Or does he kind of let you guys explore and bring stuff back for him to respond to?
I mean, he's very, very specific. This is something that I've noticed as the years go on, is he can be intensely specific about the specific elements he wants to hear, but then he doesn't explain that. He doesn't waste a lot of breath bringing us on board. He just kind of gives us the specifics and lets us deduce and kind of collect all of those details, take a step back and realize, I see what he's doing here. You know what I mean? And my running theory, and it's been confirmed by a few different sources except Guillermo. I'll have to ask him one day. But it's to intentionally make room for interpretation or misinterpretation of what he's asking for, just because I think that he does like to harvest good ideas out of accidental misinterpretations and things like that, and keep those happy accidents in the movie.
And so how does that collaboration kind of work? Are you, Nathan and Nelson, are you working during the picture editorial period? Are you embedded, where the picture cutting rooms are? How are you sharing information, scenes for him to respond to?
It's usually, exactly that. We'll be brought in to spot a selection, like a scene or something like that. It's rare that we get to do a full spotting session of the whole movie. We might sit down with that intention, but we'll get in there and he'll just say, fast forward to the next scene. I have nothing for this one. Right. And we'll just pop through the movie, the spots that that are really important to him. And then, we wind up working pretty closely with the picture editors because we wind up needing to send stems over to them. So we'll do little crash mixes of stems, nothing like what Brad and Chris do in the final, you know what I mean? But they're useful in the Avid. And I'll let Nelson talk about how he is recruited to clean up dialogue and stuff like that during that process.
What we've learned by this point is that, and what I think people already know from having heard Guillermo talk, is that he likes to flesh out scenes in their entirety, even when they're still sort of at an assembly stage, and kind of get a feel, while they're still in camera, so to get a feel of how the movie is coming together. And he can fill in the blanks in his head. I'm sure he could, but he just really wants to get a sense, I think, for his own benefit, but also for our benefit as well. And as Nathan said, rarely are you ever going to get his time for 4 consecutive hours to sit and watch a movie in real time and talk through it scene by scene by scene. But rather, he's going to provide direction for juicier kind of sections. And I think creatively, we're often left to our own devices to kind of fill in the blanks. In providing direction for certain scenes, he's also inviting us to fill in the blanks in terms of what his approach might be for other scenes that we may not have discussed with him, right? You're sort of given marching orders based on certain scenes, right? The kind of sexier trophy scenes in the movie. And that was certainly the case in this movie, no question about it.
Nelson, I love that you refer to some of the scenes to work on as juicy scenes, because they certainly were.
Literally and figuratively, yeah.
Yeah. Well, because you guys are working so early, I'm kind of curious about, there's a lot of visual effects in this film, and as I was watching the film again, I was really struck by that. I think one of my favorite sequences is sort of in the kind of the operational theater when he's doing that, Victor's doing that first demonstration and throws the ball, and the figure catches it. And I'm presuming that that's some kind of combination of puppeteering on set with visual effects augmentation. But when those pieces aren't in place, especially with visual effects until the very end, Nathan and Nelson, how are you guys figuring? Are you just kind of guessing your way through how these sequences are going to come together and starting to put sound to them?
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, like, if I'm honest, it makes it easier, because when you get a fully fleshed out Guillermo del Toro movie, it's pretty grand and massive, and there's a ton of details. And because we're in as early as we are, we're working on this stuff. Well, it's still kind of in its infancy. We don't have the depth of field. We don't have everything that Dennis Berardi and his team bring to the table. That's the VFX supervisor. And so we can kind of work on the layers that are there, and we can really detail those out. And as those VFX updates start rolling in, we can start addressing them. You know what I mean? And you wind up with this really, really beautifully fleshed out final product as a result of it. You're right, though. That was heavily practical. The puppeteer, there was a puppeteer, controlling the guy in the lecture theater, and it was just augmentation after the fact that the VFX brought to that.
Didn't we end up using even some of the puppeteer's actual performance on for the voice?
Yeah. I mean, he was a star. I mean, like, Nelson's probably got plenty to talk about there, but yeah, that guy, he gave something really haunting to it.
Yeah, I had floated the idea just right off the bat. I mean, it was a little bit off mic and this sort of thing. So of course my radar went up, dialogue radar. And I was like, oh, so when we actually replace this, and he was like, no, we're not replacing anything. This is the voice I like. This is what's great about it. And I mean, I'm glad you mentioned this in terms of practical effects, because I heard Guillermo talk recently about Bram Stoker's Dracula, about the Coppola movie, and how it's the greatest Dracula movie ever made, and citing the practical effects in that movie. And I think he does a lot of that in his films, and I think he gives us a clear direction of where he's going, right? And ultimately what this may end up being. It also comes from having worked with him a bit now too, and kind of knowing where he's going to go with this. But as I said, he there's a very refined sketch based on the practical effects that are on screen, especially in that lecture hall, that kind of help you fill in how this thing should sound, I think.
In other cases, it almost stubbed our toe a little bit, because like one of the early calls I got was from the picture editor saying like, hey, look, we've got this scene where the creature's being attacked by wolves, and there's no wolves in the scene. So it was just a bunch of guys in like green bodysuits with wolf stuffies on their hands, like munching at Jacob Elordi, and they needed it to sound like this vicious, violent wolf attack. And so like it was a little from column A, a little from column B. Sometimes it was really, really helpful not to have fully fleshed out VFX in there. Other times it was kind of, hey, can you guys help us out?
Yeah. Because those scenes don't play very well without with the guys in their green suits
and the wolf stuffies. Yeah.
Yeah, Brad, I'm curious for you, because you're kind of representing both the mixers. Christian Cook couldn't join us today, but so Brad, and I want to make sure that I've got this right. So Brad, did you mix sound effects and Christian handle dialogue and music?
Correct. Yeah.
So tell me about the process of mixing with Guillermo. Are there temps? Does he come to the premixes? Does he just come in and you do playbacks? What's the process of mixing with Guillermo?
But this one was a little bit different. I came in for the pre-dubs, for the effects pre-dubs. So all I had with me there was Nathan to tell me all the background while we started our pre-dubs. So basically, I relied a lot on Nathan's experience and discussions with Guillermo. He's whispering in my ear all the time, going, "Oh, he really wants to hear this," and all that. So we fleshed out everything, and then and went through and did our pre-dub, and I think we had 4 weeks on the effects pre-dub for that, and which I thought at the time was like, oh, this is going to be, a lot of time. We're gonna.
It sounds so luxurious, and then
It was super luxurious, and then at the end, I'm like, I could have used more.
Always.
Always. When we started the final, we had Evan was sort of overseeing. Evan Schiff, our editor or picture editor, was overseeing sort of the mix for the first couple of weeks before we kind of wanted to sort of flesh out what we wanted to do and all that, and then present a couple reels to Guillermo. So then he came in and we played him back a few reels, and then he gave us all his notes on those, and it was and just sort of moved forward that way. We'd do a couple of reels, have him screen them, give us the notes, and then he'd come back and after we did the notes, screen it again. And that was the process moving forward until we had the final playbacks and all that. And because I think Guillermo, the first couple of weeks was remote. We did a playback because we were mixing in Toronto and he was in LA at playing back in a theater in LA, our mix. So, and then the last couple of weeks he came in person and we had him there with us the whole time.
Well, let's dive in and talk about some scenes. I love the opening of this film, the amazing sequence with the Danish sailors trapped in ice, and the first time we see both Victor and the creature. Look, we could spend an hour just unpacking the first 15 minutes of this movie because there's so much going on.
Mi comando!
Talk to me about ice and how you make it sound so cold with that ship and then the weaponry, that blunderbuss. Like there's a lot to unpack in that sequence.
Some of it was sort of lucky misfortune. We had a crazy winter and my house developed these massive ice dams. If you don't know what they are, look it up. They're dangerous and big.
I'm in Palm Springs. We don't really we don't really do much with ice dams. So
imagine a tree trunk made of ice that grows on the very edge of your roof line. And then when the sun heats up your roof enough, it falls off and you get a good ton and a half of ice that just crushes your air conditioning unit. So I had that luxury, but life deals you lemons, so you make lemonade. And I went out there with a recorder and a hammer and started taking out some of my frustration on this ice dam. And that was, we'd done a bunch of passes on the ice because that was an element that to Guillermo, it couldn't be enough. It couldn't be thick enough. It couldn't sound cold enough. It couldn't sound hard enough. It didn't matter how much we threw at it. It had to have more guys every time we went back. Okay, give me more guys hammering. Okay, here's twice as many. Give me more guys hammering. Here's twice as many. You know what I mean? And then finally, it was that ice dam that kind of tipped us over the edge. I think there was a quality to how that hammer hitting that ice sounded to him that made it sound like meters thick ice that was crushing a ship. So yeah, a little bit of lucky misfortune in the ice. The blunderbuss was a whole other kettle of fish where, I have my father-in-law works as a historical consultant, and so I have access to some historical weaponry. And so we went out and did a full artillery recording of a bunch of different muskets, a bunch of different sizes of cannons. We shot chain out of cannons. We were firing live ammunition out of the muskets, and that was kind of the starting layer. And that just sort of like built into the imaginative stuff, adding in metal resonances, putting in a church bell, having lion roars when he turns the barrels around so that the gun is snarling. But that all came from like one of those early spotting sessions that I talked about before, where we get the movie in small chunks with Guillermo. And when that gun came out, he looked at Nelson and I and he said, like, how do we make that sound bigger than everything else? And that's when I pitched the cannons, and with their support, him and Miles with their support, we found ourselves out in the cold recording loud cannons.
Nathan, I really appreciate what you were just saying about Guillermo's kind of direction, that like this has to be bigger than everything else, because that first sequence where they kind of fire at the creature with their muskets was big and meaty enough and scary enough anyway, and then they bring out the blunderbuss. So it's like you had to strategically leave yourself room to get even bigger when that thing shows up.
And a big part of that gets handed off to Brad, because he pulled some pretty fancy footwork in the mix to make sure that everything that we had lined up could accomplish that sort of dramatic crescendo. Take it away, Brad.
Yeah, that was fun. Like I gotta say, I had a lot of tools at my disposal from Nathan to be able to make that the way it was. But yeah, once we got into that scene, once I saw the blunderbuss, it was like, okay, this has to be much more of a moment. We've got to feel this thing, as opposed to just, make it big. And the muskets, yeah, we made those as big as possible. I left myself a little bit of room, but I also pulled out some. I was playing with on this mix with Subquake. I kind of pulled that out and had a little fun with that. Once I added that and was playing with the shaping of that to try to make that where you could feel it in your chest, we left some room to make that the moment it needed to be.
It's super effective. Greg, I want to bring you into the conversation. We don't often get the production sound mixers to talk to in these conversations, but it's always a treat to have you on. We had Guillermo and Dan Lawson on the podcast a few weeks ago, and we talked a lot about this opening sequence. And I just presumed when I was watching the film for the first time that this massive ship, encased in the ice, was a constructed set on a massive sound stage. So I was really kind of surprised when Dan was talking about it, that it was a set, but it was built on an outdoor parking lot in Toronto. And so you had, not only the size and scale and all those extras, but you had kind of you were out in the open with the elements and the world to deal with. So tell us a little bit about the capture on that sequence and how you contended with, being outside and the live elements.
Honestly, I can't imagine putting it inside. It was so big, and all the elements around it were large, and, just like watching the, the daily gripping of the whole thing with all these telehandlers with moving blue screens around it. It was really, really big. And for us, it was, a kind of a logistics challenge. Like, it was the ship, everything that was happening up on the ship, they'd get everything ready and get eventually all the cast up there. But then all the thing was surrounded with fans for snow machines, and we would have to have all our stuff very ready, because they eventually pull away the stairs that connect everybody down below. So we had antennas run up there, and a voice of God system, because Guillermo is, talking through a lot of things, not just to the actors, but to the, the crane operators, and had that. Once the stairs pull away, we can't really change anything anymore. So we had to make sure everything was good. And we also had, it was potentially difficult because the studio was in a area of the city where there's a lot of, trucks and things like that moving around. Particularly right next to us, there was some kind of a industrial something or other that had trucks moving around all the time. But our locations guy had, figured it all out and had them not make beeping noises when we were filming somehow magically. And then we just had to deal with the normal stuff of, fans and snow machines. And luckily, as I've told these guys before, and we had most of that dialogue was very loud. And we had these actors, Danish actors with amazing voices, and who were really fantastic, actually, in so many ways. These guys, all these actors, and yeah. And I think most of it worked out. Some of it didn't. Some stuff that didn't work so great was when the creature was in his. When you first see him, when he comes to the ship, he's got this big hood on. So his all his like big, take me to him lines and things like that were sounding kind of strange because they were all inside this like big hood. So we got all those lines wild. I'm not sure what, but for the most part, most of it worked out pretty good. All that ship stuff.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to come back to the vocalizations and the treatments for the creature, because there's a lot to talk about with that. But I love the way you guys use dynamics and in the mix. There's that, the creature gets blown off the ship by the blunderbuss, and it's this kind of thunderous cacophony. And then we go to a close up of him on the ice, and his, we think he's dead. And then just these almost like snaps, like twig snaps of his fingers, and everything goes quiet. And we just hear those finger snaps so clearly and articulately. And
¡Eso es Miguel! ¡Eso es Miguel!
it's just I think it's a great use of dynamics in the mix. There was another moment that caught my ear the second time I was watching, when the creature is escaping the exploding Waterworks tower and falls through the chute. And then you guys really take it down to almost nothing except his breathing and some air as he's falling. So I just love the use of dynamics, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. Was that something that you sort of found as you explored in the mix? Was that always sort of the way Guillermo wanted those sequences to play?
The Nathan and I talked about that tower sequence for sure. Like, I mean, when it was a little more going on our first pass through that. And then once we were in the final, we're just like, we need, because that whole moment where he drops into the water needed to be like the crescendo of that. So we kind of, during the mix of that, pulled everything out and just had that wind going. And that was a sort of like a nice conscious thing that we figured out while we were mixing, because that we just did two huge scenes with Victor and the creature, like the whole tower exploding. So wherever we could sort of find moments to get away from that and that sonic, craziness, we did. And that, I think that moment definitely is a really cool moment where we get a little bit of a break before he hits the water, and then the story changes to the creature side.
We all wanted to find his breathing in that fall, because like Nelson had queued up some really good, they sounded like kind of full adrenaline free fall breaths. And I think we were all reaching for that. And so anything we could pull out to make it so that you could just be with the creature got just stripped away. It's a bit of a process of discovery.
One of the things I really noticed the second time I was watching through the film is how the creature's voice, changes throughout the film. So we got that opening sequence, and it's really, those first few scenes, he just sounds like an animal. Like, it's very, I'm sure that you had a lot of animal stuff in there. I'm kind of curious to hear, what's underlying those vocalizations at the beginning of the film. But then as the movie goes on, and certainly when we get into the, the second part, which is his version of the story, the voice is much more naturalistic, although I'm sure that there was still some stuff going on with Jacob Elordi's voice in those sequences. It's an extraordinary performance. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the evolution of the vocalization treatment for the creature from the beginning through the end, because it's really such a huge. It's a huge leader for us in our emotional relationship with the creature.
We'd had a conversation kind of early on about this. Nelson and I were talking about it, because there's this line later in the movie when the creature's confronting Victor about like make me a companion, and he says, I'm not something, I'm someone. And we kind of ran with that. We wanted him to be something in the beginning of the movie and evolve into someone at the end. So it's great that stood out to you. That opening scene was a great testing ground for the big moments, right? But we knew that wasn't going to be the creature for the movie. He's going to have a personality. He's going to speak English. He's going to be gentle. He's going to be docile. And so it really came down to finding animal textures that were sonically resemblant of Jacob's voice, and using all of the sort of toys, plugins, softwares to like make these shaped resonances that could live in his chest under every line of dialogue, every breath. Like, it's all covered. We have it covered for the whole movie. We just needed to make sure that it was on a fader so that we could go from rage monster to docile, caring, tender giant without the audience feeling like something had either disappeared or just kind of come out of nowhere. And a lot of that was, that was all built. Like, I built all of that as a sound design pass and handed it over to Chris and Nelson, and kind of backed off at that point because we all knew it needed to be tucked in.
At essentially our first spotting session of just pieces of the film, Guillermo, as a sort of, he just kind of threw this comment out at the end of it, just saying, hey, we should get a breath pass for Jacob for the whole movie. And it's like, okay. I mean, yeah, some of it is very subtle, and it's, it didn't pick up as well at times as it could have. But what I took that as is, well, we're going to get this at high res right away, because it's not just a matter of recording a breath pass. Obviously, we need enough runway to be able to make this interesting from a design standpoint. This note is going to happen to some degree. This is a note that's going to come at us, right? Spoiler. And we're talking literally November. I mean, not the spotting session, but when we recorded Jacob was end of November, 2024. And we got a few key lines, and then we got a breath pass for, I want to say, about half the movie. We recorded it all at high res, and then, did subsequent sessions with him for different lines of dialogue that Guillermo wanted. I sort of cheated and asked for more efforts each time. And Guillermo was gracious about, and certainly Jacob, about doing it. And then shocker, Nathan, a month before the premix started, like 4 weeks before the premix started, it's like Guillermo, there he was with a big creature note. Like, big creature note. We need to augment this. We need to add animal noises. We need him to sound fierce here. And I mean, he wasn't very specific in terms of where and necessarily in terms of how, right? It was basically left to us. Fortunately, we had the raw material to do it. I had already cut it for most of the movie. I'd already prepared the tracks, Jill Purdy and I, in stripping all of Jacob's production dialogue out from the rest of the dialogue. It was its own little stem, because we knew we needed to be able to get at it in the mix and deal with it whatever way we needed to. Handed that stuff over to Nathan for him to work his magic with. He did it in some of the ways that he just described. And then when he handed it back to Chris Cook, it was interesting because it was this process by which Chris sort of watched it. He was a little newer to the movie, right? I mean, we'd already spent half a year working on this thing, but he was a little bit newer to it. And once we were through the whole premix, we're like, okay, let's spend the next 2 days just working on Jacob. So he took Nathan's tracks and essentially, by feel, basically, it's like, how much of a creature do we want him to be here? How fierce is he here? How tender is he here? How much of a child is he here, right? And, again, a big part of it too was, I can't say enough how much Jacob brought to this, how much he got it. Like, he understood what it was that we were trying to do. Like that, he's a big dude. He's a tall dude, but the cavity that the chest cavity that guy has, and what he can do vocally. I mean, he's got something kind of rare in his tool belt, for an actor, to be able to do that. And so to your point, Glenn, there are times when we were not really doing that much design wise with him. A lot of it was Jacob, in the back half of the movie, certainly, right? Where even as childlike and tender as he sounded, there was still this kind of this heaviness to it, right? And largely through Jacob and through what Chris was doing, I assume, with EQ.
It's an extraordinary performance, especially. I'm curious though. Like, am I hearing a difference in the way his voice sounds during Victor's side of the story versus the creature's side? Is there any kind of difference in the vocal treatments between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's Chris Cook toggling. I mean, that's obviously, it's a performance thing that Jacob brings to it in terms of his level of production and what I call attack on lines and on efforts. But it's also, again, what Nathan had brought to it in terms of creature, like in terms of animal layers, and Chris's judgment, with sort of like we always work like this four-headed monster in that room, right? And we, we're always kind of looking at each other going, yeah, yes, no, you think? Sort of 7 out of 10, 5 out of 10, a little more of this, a little more of that. And it's really collaborative, like working with these guys and doing this. And I'm not going to get corny about it, but that was definitely these 4 cylinders kind of going, yeah, okay. And I mean, I brag about it still, how we got it really right, really fast, right? I mean, the process took a long time, but Guillermo's was, I mean, there weren't a lot of notes on the creature, and there should have been. I mean, there should have been, but there weren't.
There could have been, certainly.
There could have been. There could have been, yes.
Now, did I hear this correctly? Is there some Guillermo in there as well?
So Guillermo's not in the creature like Jacob Elordi, but we did hang him. He is one of the guys in the gallows, so he is choking to death.
Yeah, that's right.
We hung Guillermo, and he is also the flayed man who wakes up on the desk when Victor has his first brush of success with his experiments in his apartment. That's Guillermo gasping and trying to stay alive. But we kill him.
Yeah, we put Guillermo in every. He gets his place in every movie.
Yeah, it's funny. He was a little bit reluctant, but I just shoved him into the booth and insisted.
A little reluctant. I've seen him. I just saw him at Sundance singing with a mariachi band. He's a performer. He'll get in there and do it.
I agree. And I think he would too.
And
on the day I said, "Come on, man, it's tradition." He just looked at me and said, "Traditions are meant to be broken." And then as we design, because we have these like sandbox days where we just get together and have a play date and make crazy sounds together. And then I think as he warmed up to that process, he got more and more into it, and then it was a lot easier to get him to go in there and choke to death.
Yeah, he's oddly DIY, like for the expansive kind of scope of his movies, how huge they are to look at and to hear. There's something still oddly kind of getting his hands dirty and DIY about his kind of filmmaking, almost like student filmmaking, where he still kind of gets involved at that level. Maybe not as much now, but I've always seen that in him.
So the last time I saw you guys was just a few weeks ago in Los Angeles at the Bake Off at the Academy, which is just a process that I love so much. And I want to talk about it a little bit. And I mean, most of our audience, I think, knows how this process works. But for those who don't, the way one gets nominated for an Academy Award for Best Sound is the sound branch. At some point in December, gets a list of hundreds of eligible films, and the branch votes, and the top 10 vote getters get invited to be on the short list. And when you're on the short list, you get invited to the Bake Off, which is a great tradition. So for the Bake Off, for those who don't know, it's everybody gets together and you guys put together a 10-minute reel of the best sounding bits in the movie, and you play the reel and talk about it, and then people vote, and the top 5 move on to get the nomination. So I was particularly struck by your Bake Off reel, which was really courageous. You guys chose to focus on one continuous 10-minute sequence without any edits, which is a pretty courageous thing to do. So I'm just kind of curious, what was the process of putting that Bake Off reel together? I mean, I thought it was a genius reel. It starts off with that great, Alexander Desplat waltz, which is on this grisly sequence, a montage of Victor dissecting bodies to put the creature together. and then it goes all the way through, this kind of this huge fight between Victor and Harlander, and then finally, the major sequence of the animation, the reanimation of the creature in the huge storm. So I don't know, I don't know how you guys managed to luck out to get 1 10-minute chunk that put all that in, but how did you guys come to that decision, and why was that the right call for this film?
I'm only going to say one thing right off the bat about that, just so you know. That was a choice between that and 2 other continuous 10-minute chunks. Okay, just so you know.
I'm going to guess the opening sequence was also a contender.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the other contender was the forest sequence when he walked through the forest. Nice quiet scene, because that would have also included one of the tower explosions. I think there were a lot of overthinking went into this. Yes. But I think what ultimately sealed the deal was that the clip we chose ended in failure, because it's Victor thinking he'd failed at his experiment, and we all knew that we were going to walk out of the bake-off feeling as though maybe we'd failed at our experiment. So it was a bit of a self-portrait.
Nonsense.
But then the creature woke up, and look what happened,
Well, look, I was in the room. It played through the roof. Like it was that real. It was not a surprise to me when you guys got nominated. After hearing that reel in the room, it turned out to be just a fantastic choice. But tell me a little bit about why did you feel like that particular sequence encapsulated, Greg's production tracks? Like why did it hit all of the targets that you needed it to hit in that 10-minute reel?
Well, that was part of it. That was part of the overthinking process, because it's great to show the forest scene, because it is this beautiful scene, and we're all 3 of the 4 people you're interviewing right now are very proud of that, because it was all post sound. You know what I mean? But that's not a strike 4. And knowing that the creation scene, first of all, the creation scene, that's the scene that so many people think of when they think of Frankenstein, is the creation of the creature. So it's dramatically pretty fun to play for people to, win or lose, check out what we did. But also it's got this amazing sequence of Victor and Harlander arguing on the roof under a rain machine, and you can hear what they're saying and understand the words coming out of their mouths. And so that was a big contributor to why we landed on that, because we just felt like it was flexing all of the muscles we had to.
Yeah, it hit all the notes, Foley, all the different surfaces, the location, all the sound effects, the music in that waltz moment, like everything was included in that moment, that, and also, like to a certain extent, we talked about it, and, we want to draw people in. Our point for that bake-off was to draw the audience in and go, oh my God, what happens next? And we had so many choices in that movie that we could have done, but that one, like Nathan said, was the quintessential moment of what you think of in Frankenstein. And also with one section, you get people invested in the story, I think. And that was what we were trying to do, get people to sit there and soak it in and get drawn in. And I think we achieved that with one scene. And to our luck, that whole sequence was 9 minutes and 59 seconds. We timed it out. So it was like, this is meant to be.
Yeah, sometimes the movie tells you something.
Yeah, for sure. Well, but it also just called up. Look, I am in love with the treatment of the sound in the Waterworks factory. I mean, just the way the sound feels in that space is so magical.
The structure's basically intact, and there's a chute going from top right to the bottom. I can arrange for your belongings. We'll bring them from Edinburgh.
Obviously, that was a constructed set on a soundstage, probably a bunch of wood and maybe some plaster. But I presume that there was a lot of work on your guys' part to build kind of the sonic treatment for what the abandoned Waterworks was going to sound like.
It became pretty clear pretty quickly. I mean, in large part thanks to the shift in the edit style, just the picture edit, right? Because we go from this frantic editing style in the first half during Victor's kind of, chaotic rock star half of the movie into this fairy tale where the creature becomes a more central point. And that the water treatment tower is the segue that hands off from one to the other. And so we started to have to weave in more tonal, moody elements, like the room where he's kept in. If you're paying attention, you notice that room is breathing, literally breathing. You know what I mean? Like you can hear this pulsing sort of air in there, you know what I mean? And that's all just sort of inspired by the way it was shot, the way it was edited. Like if there's a whole making of documentary on Netflix where they show how the pillars, they're removable. So these camera movements can be long and sweeping and just sort of like drift through a room. And so, the visuals really informed how we were going to attack that and make it a bit more moody, and then add to that, like the dialogue reverbs and stuff like that Chris was picking for each of the spaces. It kind of makes it feel lived in.
Greg, I want to hear from you about kind of just the challenges of, capturing production sound on that set. When we talked with Dan, one of the things that he told us that I was kind of shocked by was, he didn't use smoke for those sequences. He actually used steam from boilers that were on the set. So I can't even imagine kind of what you were faced with. I mean, first of all, it must have been pretty muggy and swampy in there, but goodness, kind of what were your challenges in capturing great production sound on that set?
The usual stuff, but I mean, yeah, like you said, they used a lot of steam, and so that's for us, that's just like a continual conversation with the special effects guys to be all over that and making sure that they're accomplishing what they need visually with as little noise as possible, and making sure we're turning off the ones that are off camera. And like you said, also it was kind of complicated booming in that space because of all the pillars, and thankfully Guillermo is like there's only one camera all the time, so on some other things we could have got into a lot more difficulties and trouble.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to ask you about that. So Guillermo is so specific about what he wants to shoot. He knows where he wants to put the camera. He knows kind of what the shot is going to be. So he doesn't, he's not shooting stuff with 3 or 4 cameras, which makes your life a lot more complicated.
Oh my God.
To capture production.
Like, I mean, as a production sound mixer, that's perhaps the sort of worst thing that happens to us on a daily basis on a typical movie is like, multiple cameras. And that we know that, okay, this shot's going to be used probably with this camera, but they'll run that other one anyway, and it prevents us from, and most of the time you just have to put up with it. But Guillermo's very smart, and he it's great to watch him work, and he tells the story with these beautiful choreographed moving camera shots, and the crane is always moving, and it's always this beautiful kind of a dance, but there's no extra unnecessary thing that's being done, because this is where the story is being told. This is the shot is, and so for us, it's kind of in a way going back to the old days, of one camera, and it's such a pleasure actually to to work in under those conditions.
Brad, you brought up the Foley, and I want to give you guys a chance to shout out your Foley department, because one of the things that I thought about when I was watching, your Bake Off reel was like how much fun did the Foley department have during that montage sequence with the dissecting of the bodies under that amazing waltz. They must have just had a field day with all of that stuff.
Yeah, those guys are amazing. I never have to worry about anything when I'm get their stuff, and because that lab alone, with you have the metal staircase, like in that sequence we had in the Bake Off, where he runs down the metal staircase onto the tiled floor, across the grate of the thing over the hole, and then back onto the tile to go get Hollander had fallen. It's like everything just sounds exactly like it needs to sound. And yeah, they were just the stuff they gave us was stellar. And I can't say enough about those guys.
I remember the day that they were going to shoot that scene. I wasn't there, but I did get an email from Chelsea, and the email was just it's dissection day, and it was a picture of just some like raw chicken bits, a cleaver, and a massive tub of hand sanitizer, and in the background. And I was just like, oh man, these are kids in a candy shop. This is a good day at the office for the Foley team, because I know what's in there, and for us, we kind of knew what was going to be coming with the score. We knew it was like, we kind of had an idea based on our past with Guillermo what this was going to be. It's going to be dark but comic, you know what I mean? It was going to be funny. And so, we needed to spend, sound effects wise, we needed to kind of stay out of the way a little bit and let that Foley really shine. And boy, did it.
Yeah, you're right, because the humor comes out of that crazy juxtaposition of that beautiful waltz with these grisly sounds, and it's a hilarious sequence.
It is. Yeah. Like, it's just, it's I like this is the thing that I've noticed, and I've said this before. I've seen the movie a few times in theaters, and when I'm looking around at the other people in the room, you can always pick out the squeamish people. They always think to look away from the screen, but they never think to plug their ears, and you can't hide from that sound. You can hear the resonance of the blade kind of singing as he's slicing through flesh that isn't spongy or squishy or over the top. It sounds like a dissection of a dead guy, you know what I mean? Or cutting through the leg with the bone saw, you can't really escape it unless you close your eyes and plug your ears. And so I think, it's fun to really turn some stomachs.
And those, the Foley guys, I remember we had them, they came out, was it during the final or during the pre-dubs? They came out and we screened them, those sections of the movie beforehand. So they had a little field trip. Their whole crew came out and sat in the theater, and we played through those sections for them, and they were you could see the excitement and the giddiness like little kids.
It's a thing with the whole movie, right? Like, when you watch this movie and you hear it, you can hear how much fun we had making it, and the same applies to them. Like, you can tell that was a jungle gym for them. Like, that was that day in school where they wheel out the jungle gym in gym class, and it's just the best day. Well, they get this beautifully shot, just gorgeous dissection scene, and they get to have the time of their life. I wasn't there, but I mean, Chelsea told me a story about Goro using a chicken rib cage for when he's putting the eye into the skull of the creature, and it's just like these weird little repurposes, like when they repurpose things to sound appropriate to what you're seeing, and it's so believable, it's so plausible.
Because of the subject matter, because of what's being depicted, this is also just a great use of Dolby Atmos in this track. You guys really, that was another thing that stood out for me when I was, in the room listening to the Bake Off reel was how much stuff is moving around, how dynamic the track is, how much you guys are using the space. And Brad, not just on the sound effects for you. I mean, look, that the storm sequence with the reanimation in Atmos, unbelievable. But Chris did an amazing job with Alexander Desplat's score in Atmos. So talk to me a little bit about using Atmos in the track.
Oh yeah, the Atmos. Like I had so much fun using the Atmos. Like especially in that scene, the fly through of the body on the creation scene. We just, Nathan and I sat there and just had a ball in the pre-dubs playing with that and panning the heart. Going like every surface that we crossed through, was swept through you, and everything with the objects. Music wise, I think Chris, I think all the music ended up being on objects, so he could have control over that and place stuff, sort of get it off the front wall whenever we needed to. And yeah, Guillermo is really, really great about wanting to fill the space. It's like I remember notes from, and this comes from working with him for a long time, we were able to anticipate all this stuff. There's moments where he wants the concentration on the screen and he wants to pull everything back in the room. The Dolby Atmos allows us to do that so beautifully and separate stuff and make it, where we can focus to a certain point. And I think we were able to achieve that really, really well on this movie. And it was this movie lends itself to Atmos. It's just, over the top, the thunder everywhere. I was, it's like wherever I saw a thunder, like a light or whatever, it's like, okay, we need to put that over there, in the lab or in downstairs, it's like above us where that toll comes out, you can see, with some reverb to make it sound like it's coming through that above us. And yeah, it's just such a great tool. And it was so much fun on this mix to use all that. Like we have such a beautiful visual to work with. We have to meet that standard with the sound.
All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming on the Dolby Podcast today. Congratulations on your Academy Award nomination for Best Sound for Frankenstein. Very well deserved. And it's good to see you guys again.
You too.
Yeah, you too.
Always great to see you.
Thanks very much.
Many thanks to Nathan, Nelson, Brad, and Greg for joining us on the show today. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Netflix for helping us put this conversation together. Be sure to check out Frankenstein, now streaming on Netflix in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. We have links, as always, in our show notes. And as I mentioned up top, this episode is part of our ongoing coverage of the 98th Academy Awards. As we do every year, we've been hosting many conversations with the nominees in sound, cinematography, and original score categories. You can find links to a playlist of those episodes, including the other 2 about Frankenstein, in our show notes. And as the clock ticks down to the Oscars broadcast on March 15th, we've got even more interviews coming. So be sure you are subscribed to us here at Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about what we do at Dolby Creator Lab, head on over to dolbycreatorlab.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this show, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Kahn. Thanks for joining us.